Welcome to USA Football's Coach and Coordinator Podcast, where top football coaches from around the country share their stories, philosophies, concepts, and strategies to help you get better on and off the field. Now, here's your host, Keith Grabowski.
Before we get going today, there's a couple things I'd like you to check out and see what you can do with this information to help your program. The first is our football development model and our Football for All podcast. The football development model really does the heavy lift for you as a high school coach. It puts together the program from game types, through drill progressions, through coach certifications, everything you need to really get everybody in your youth football community on the same page. Check that out at fdm.usafootball.com. And if you would, please introduce your youth football community to our Football for All podcast. There's great information on that educates your stakeholders about the football development model and how you can get that going in your community, as well as some great stories from current and former NFL players, current and former coaches and commissioners, and just people who will have some interesting takes on everything happening in football. Check that out on the Football for All podcast. Also, this is a time where we're phasing back in to football, and you're probably looking for some drills that can get your players acclimated to the skills that they're going to have to use onto the field. But you have to do it in a way that maybe has been different in the past. You have to do some non-contact things. And if you're looking for blocking, defeating blocks, and tackling drills, go to footballdevelopment.com. Check out our contact system, our advanced tackling system, and our free shoulder tackle system. If you sign up with your email, you can choose 3 free videos from any of those, as well as get the shoulder tackle course for free. Again, check that out at footballdevelopment.com. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. On today's podcast, we discuss making the transition to a new program as a coordinator, specifically a defensive coordinator. And joining us again on the podcast is the defensive coordinator at the University of South Dakota, Travis Johansen. Travis, great to have you back here.
Awesome to be back, Keith. Love everything you're doing. I listen every week. It's always great stuff, so appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always great to get a guest back here again and go deeper on things. And, we were kicking around some ideas, and I thought this would be a really good one. There's a lot of guys who have to make that transition, and it's not always the easiest thing. You have to get a lot of people on the same page. There's a lot of work to do to build relationships, to make sure everybody understands everything. And ultimately, at the heart of it, coordinate means to bring together, right? It doesn't mean that you're some kind of a guru, though. We know you've done a lot of great stuff. Read about that Sports Illustrated article you were in and positionless defense that you've become known for. But at the end of the day, none of that knowledge that's up here really matters if you can't communicate it and get everybody working together.
Yeah, 100%. And each each venture is different for everybody. There's different people and personalities and players and ideas that different programs have when you step into a new staff, and so there's certainly a lot of challenges that are seen or unforeseen that happen. You got to have the ability to keep everything together and moving forward. And, that's been a great transition so far here at South Dakota. And although, some of the things that, we would have liked to have gone back and done different, I think you always do
Sure.
as you learn from it. But no, there's certainly quite a few things to wrangle up together. And I think you hit it right on the head. It's about that.
Right. And when we first had you on the podcast, you were just making that transition, just beginning it. You had left your position at Grandview, which is a top 15 NAIA program, where you did an excellent job there. And then coming to South Dakota in a bear of a conference. You guys, you play some really good football there. So real quick, you have to get everybody on the same page. So talk to us about the landscape that was in place. Everybody faces different situation, walks into different things. Sometimes it's bringing a lot of guys along. Sometimes it's coaching up those guys who have been retained. So what did the landscape look like for you?
Yeah. So when I first got there, just peeling it back, I think, the first reason I wanted to be there, it was Coach Nielsen, our head coach, who's, really well known for being able to turn programs from, kind of that mid to low level, success level to competing for winning national championships. And he's done that his entire career, and 30 years as a head coach. I wanted to step into that role and see firsthand how he's been doing it. And regardless of what that landscape looked like, I was ready to with a ton of experience doing it or not, I was going to take that challenge on. And really follow his lead in the way he saw it going. And, we had, at that point in time, he felt like he had some talent on the staff still that he wanted to move forward with. And so we had a linebackers coach who also coordinated our special teams. We had a defensive backs coach that he had since his time at Western Illinois. And then our defensive line coach who he had spent a lot of time with earlier in his career. So, we had a partial staff there in place, 3 of the really 6 kind of positions. If you count the graduate assistant, which is a big deal on staffs these days, they're on-field coaches now. So, we moved forward with those guys, and then a roster that was probably built different than I was accustomed to. Just from a skill set standpoint, and the dollars they invested at different positions were a little bit different. And so, we had that going on. And then, some kids that have in their careers have had, our seniors, I was their 4th coordinator in 4 years. And so there were a lot of different elements there as you stepped in and tried to figure out, how to go about, getting the staff on the same page, the players, moving in the right direction. And then, schematically figuring out how this roster is going to fit into what we can do well. And so, that's kind of what we walked into, and you go from there.
So Coach Nielsen being a big part of why you came on board, and I'm sure in, going through that interview process and then finally offering you the position, he had something big and a reason why he wanted to bring you in. What was the number one thing he really wanted to see from you as you took over leading this defense?
I think coach, and you look on our staff all over, I think we got a lot of good people. I think he realizes over the years it's still a game of people, and the type of people, regardless of, what you've done or what level it may be, or, what your experience is finding good people. I think, we were on the, we walk in the same line, I think, in that regard. And then I think he wanted, just a little bit more versatility in our defense. He wanted to see maybe things that were a little harder to prepare, but still felt like we're simple enough that we're still sound and playing the game the right way. So I think the combination of those two things, and I think the willingness to be flexible with, with knowing that, it will take a little bit of time to move the roster around and develop guys and get this whole thing moving in the right direction. Our AD put it great. He said, turning programs a lot like turning an aircraft carrier. It takes a little while to turn it, but once it's there, it's going to push in the right direction. And so, I think those things in combination, we felt like we're on the same page with. We're like-minded that way, and we could go recruit developmental, versatile players at South Dakota with the investment that this place has put in it, and be really successful. So I think we see things along the same lines a lot.
Definitely. So part of that first task then is you've got other positions to fill, right? You're going to have to fill out that staff in order to get them moving together in the same direction. So how did you go about handling that portion of it?
Yeah, so we talked, really we're going to hire, an outside linebackers coach. And really the main goal of that was, somebody who's going to we felt like would be a great developmental teacher. 1, 2 was like-minded, had a really developmental mindset that we didn't want to just go acquire talent. We want to bring in the right people, that the kids that were going to have the whole mindset of, I'm going to get into the program and I'm going to develop, and I'm going to continue to do that as long and hard as it takes. Tough, competitive kids that they didn't want to just go out and sign guys that might have so many stars or so many offers, that we wanted to really learn about the people we were bringing in. And then, I thought somebody that could bring a lot of credibility to our staff from a overall experience standpoint. So, we found a great guy. Abdul Hodge is his name. You might remember him. Played for the Green Bay Packers and Cincinnati Bengals for a while. Played at the University of Iowa. Was a third-round draft pick and had been, helping with the Tennessee Titans and with Iowa for a while. And, it was just a great fit. He actually brought some experience with starting his own IT company. I thought it was interesting that, after a long NFL career, jumped into, that world and brought some experience, really outside of just coaching ball, that I felt was not just necessary, but really intriguing. And so he's been an awesome addition, and we identified a really unique guy that is, committed to really the development of players and recruiting the right people and identifying what that looks like. And so his experience brought that all together, and it was a great piece we needed in our puzzle.
So you get your staff together. What are some of the first things you're doing then in this transition to prepare them to understand the defense, to teach the defense, and then as well as, moving things forward as a defensive unit?
I think that's one of the more challenging things is really once you put your feet on the ground is how you don't know any guys on a real relationship standpoint, how they teach, where their minds have been over the years. And so, really you start from the ground up, no different than a player. You take as much time in those meeting rooms to go through it in the same way, get the language built out the same way, get us all speaking the same language. And then really, pulling back the installs and peeling everything back so it's not as daunting for them. And so, our first spring was, really limited. We wanted to see, we're still identifying what our guys are really good at, how our coaches teach, what they're identifying on tape, all those sort of things, and I think sometimes the tendency is just to go, blast schematics from the get-go and try and get as much in as you can. And really, I wanted to peel it back and slow it down and make sure what we were doing was right and verbalized the right way. And so, we spent a lot of time individually, not so much as a staff, a lot of defensive whole unit groups. We're sitting one-on-one with the outside and inside backers coach and our D-line coach one-on-one, our secondary coach one-on-one, and just going through it really position specific without the rest of it involved, and wanted to make us great technical teachers and understanding how it fit in all the schematics, before really the why hits, with all the other positions. So, you just laying that foundation for them, no different than our players.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, you need to understand the skill sets of your coaches as well. And I know, having been in a similar position and bringing, new people on board, I really wanted to understand what is this coach most comfortable with teaching. There's certainly going to be things we want him to teach, but what can he hang his hat on? What is he best at that he feels most confident with? Because, just as with you find those things that your players can hang their hat on, you want your coaches to have things that are in their wheelhouse too, because it's just going to help make the unit more successful. How do you go about figuring out, how all those puzzle pieces fit together?
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, I think a lot of it is just being aware of how we're coaching and giving those guys the platform after practice, watching, cut-ups of prior teams we played, and just talking, and seeing where those eyes are taking them. And a lot of it isn't so much aptitude. It's more just experience and comfortability with what they've done in the past. And so I think a lot of it is, translating your experience into what we want that to look like moving forward. And so I think if you lay kind of a clear framework as to what you're doing, how they start to fit into that just naturally changes. And so, I don't think there's, I think all coaches that are at our level for the most part are really talented guys. You don't think you get to this spot without having the aptitude to do it. It's more so about, what's that experience allowed you to do. And so, my goal was to lay a great foundation. Let's talk about the technical aspects of teaching. And then once you got that framework, now you can start to not just be an executor, but a contributor. And I think those guys have done a great job at our place, but initially it's a lot more listening than talking at the guys and trying to get them to open up and communicate comfortably, so you can have an idea of what that feel is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I've been able to go and become part of a new coaching staff, it is that listening portion. And what's always fun about this is not, okay, I'm the coordinator now and you guys are going to do it exactly this way all the time. That there's a little bit of that give and take, that it's the opportunity for you to learn as well. Because these guys, as you said, they've got some skill, they've got some aptitude. As you look back on that, what were some of the things maybe that you were able to pick up that helped you better do your job?
Yeah, I think you try and pick up something from everybody you come across. And when I first got there, I think more so than anything, those guys had relationships with their players. I think it made that transition, whereas if, would have brought in the whole staff with me, you think it might be an easier transition, but in the same breath, nobody knows anything about any of them. And so, I think the relationships those guys had built, the experience of going through the league schedule a couple times, those two things in combination allow you to maybe get a step up in your preparation, not only for the league, but as you develop relationships with guys, kind of what makes those players tick, what didn't go great for them in the past, and how you can get out in front of some of those, challenges that you're going to face from developing your roster and developing those people that are going to actually go play the game. And so, and along with that, there's obviously conversations with language and verbiage and technically how to teach. I think those conversations have always been good. So you learn a little bit that way too. Obviously you want things done the way you've been successful doing them, but in the same breath, humble enough to step back and go, hey, there's other ideas out there, and I want to be open to all of them all the time. And so, giving those guys a platform to do that, I think is really important too.
Absolutely. So you get those guys on the same page, then it's the process of looking at that roster. So prior to hitting the field in spring ball, how much work did you guys do in looking at, okay, here's the defense now, here's some of the things we like to build on. So before you hit spring ball, how much did you look at kind of placing guys, maybe having to move guys, maybe think about guys differently than they had before?
Yeah, I think we looked at the tough thing was there wasn't a lot of returning starters. Lost a big chunk of guys, had a number of guys that were coming off of injury from the year before. So didn't have a lot of, game film to watch on these guys. We lost a lot. I personally took a lot of that to myself and really wanted to see what we had from an athlete standpoint. And then, from there it was, just my best judgment, to be honest, of where we felt these guys would fit. We're transitioning from a true 4-3 with, 4 hands down and a bigger set of linebackers and transitioning to, really in some instances a 3-3-5 in the way we shape it. And so, it's obviously some different skill sets involved when you're working like that, but it takes you just going with your gut a lot of times. And part of that is meeting the players one-on-one, understanding what they've gone through, and then making your decisions from there. But spent a lot of time building out the depth chart the way we thought. And obviously having a staff that had been there was assists in that. I think to find out how to use those guys and not just step back and be like, well, you were part of a, situation that we felt like might not have been successful, and making that impression. That's not always the case. And so, there's a lot of assets there when you get there that, take the schematics aside, whether you agree or don't agree with what happened. There's still a lot to benefit from that experience that those guys had. And so, leaning on them to understand the skill sets of these guys. They've seen it live, and then making the decisions from there. And so, a lot of practice tape we watched on a lot of them dudes.
So you mentioned one of the things Coach Nielsen really wanted were, to bring in some things that are hard to prepare for, but simple and sound. So with, I guess, that overarching objective in mind, what went into that first spring install? What did you feel is, a sweet spot for how much you could put in at that time, given that you do have, new staff working with you and, as you said before, a lot of players who were not returning starters?
Yeah, so we probably, the way I went into it, we had a list and it was almost over installed. Hey, how much of this can we actually get to, and prioritized it top to bottom. And so, we knew our base stuff we wanted to get to day one, and that we had been installing and teaching obviously through the winter with the hours that we do get, and got them prepared that way, so we could hit the ground running a touch. And then we really just evaled it per day. How did we feel like we handled all the things that we needed to, after about our first 3 installs, what else can we get to? What do we feel comfortable we can run well, and what tweak and look can we get to? And we probably didn't get to as much as we had hoped in the spring, but what we ran well. And then how that was going to fit, the things that we thought were going to be necessary early on in the year to be successful. We wanted to make sure that was in there too. And so, I think it's mostly about what we can handle more than what we want to do.
Right. So you get going, things get started. That's always a very dynamic process. And a lot of it, you have that first install, you come back in, you meet as a staff, watch some of that film. What do you start to learn, and what adjustments are you looking to see that maybe you have to make as you tweak this install, or maybe evaluate where you've placed players, et cetera?
I'll tell you the biggest thing, and looking back, and we talked about it a ton in our off season, although it's all jacked up right now. We look back at that whole process, and I look back on it, and I think that the number one thing before, especially in our scenario, came in with a group of players. And to be honest, I didn't do a great job of identifying this, but, our players had gone through a number of different coordinators. And so their springs over the last 3 or 4 years, in some cases, have been, finish a season, new coordinator, jump into spring football, and we're right back to installing some scheme. And the next phase is the same way. And so what didn't happen in spring ball was a lot of developing the fundamentals of the game at a high level, the tackling and the block destruction, all those sort of things that, to be honest, when you get in spring, and our spring, was about that again, it didn't become we didn't have a lot of live work, and just didn't do a great job of evaluating where we're at from a fundamental standpoint and how that was going to affect our season. And so, I think as we look back on it and we look at that tape and start to really break it down, how great a job did we do at turning it on and saying, hey, here's where we're at fundamentally. We need to become a better tackler. We need to hold this group more accountable in the way we're finishing and things like that, because it did show its face a lot in our season. And, we look at places where we could have, tipped the scales, fundamentally, if we were improved. We're legitimately, statistically looking at 2 games we could have turned the tides on, just with a couple of, fundamental errors. And so, I think that's A1, really being able to identify where your team's at from that level and what their experience has been to this point, how much of that has been part of their careers, and then from there, the schematics, they are what they are, and how we tweak and adjust things, all are based on how they're grasping the concepts.
Yeah, I think I want to take a step back here too, because I think it's important. Now these guys have a different coordinator, all these off seasons. Yes, right. There's all the scheme, but you also kind of got to set the stage for what is this unit about? Who are we? What are the things we believe in? What are the behaviors we expect from you? In other words, what's the culture of this defense, right? That lives within the overall culture of the program. How did you go about establishing those things, and what were some important steps along the way with that?
I think the one thing that we always want to make sure, and I'm not a big Fifi hashtag guy that with a bunch of slogans and sayings, never been kind of my deal, but from day one, We talk about, guys being their true, genuine, authentic selves. We want these guys to present themselves, who they are, to their teammates, and to touch their teammates positively. We talk a lot about, being mindful of your relationships and creating what I call positive ratio. We talk so much about, as coaches about, hey, you need to lead, but how do you go ahead and do that? And what does that look like? And I think a lot of times we present it to players as coaches as, hey, you're ready to bite that guy in the tail when he does something wrong. And don't be afraid to bite that in the tail and hold that guy accountable. But what we lose focus on is, if, I don't care who is a player. I think if I was in any of those guys' shoes, and if I didn't have a great relationship with that person, doesn't have to be great, but an overall positive relationship with that person, he bites me in the tail, I'm not going to respond to that. And so find different ways to positively impact your teammates. So when the time is right, and you do need to hold each other accountable, it's coming from a place of respect, and appreciating what your teammates are doing. And so, I think the big thing for me was, when I got there is just setting the standard and the expectation of, here's what accountability means. Here's what leadership looks like. And here's what humility looks like. And talking to those guys in a lot of one-on-ones, and a lot of one-on-ones, and empowering those guys to become better men and people, so they have those tools and abilities to move forward with. And I think a lot of that has to do in recruiting too. We want to recruit that type of human being. And then a lot of that takes care of itself, how we tell these guys we want our defense to be. I don't think it's going to be too far from everybody else. We want to be a very, very physical unit that is mindful of being physical all the time, but is equipped with the tools to do that. And so we talk about being developmental players, always searching to become better, from a fundamental standpoint, that we never think that our game is outside of our hands. We want these guys to always think, I can be productive and I don't have to be unblocked. That's not it. I need to be productive, and I don't have to have somebody leveraging a back for me. I can go make that play. Fundamentally, I'm built to be productive. And then technically taught in a way that we really understand technically why it's important, that fundamentally and technically we're built that way, and then understand what we're doing schematically. We have the aptitude to run the show. And so those three things we're always going to pride ourselves on, along with the makeup of who we are individually. And so, a lot of that wasn't, you don't get time to build that when you're constantly turning guys over. And so, it's been my goal to, push that message. And a lot of that's Coach Nielsen's message too. Wants our team to be that way, and we'll continue to be.
So from, I guess, a teaching method standpoint, the installation, as you're now putting the defense in for the first time with these guys, what do you feel are some of the best things you guys have in your method, some of the best practices in the way that you're going to install this information with these guys, walk them through it, get them to run it on the field, and essentially play fast?
Yeah, I think, we talk about all the time is one, you got to get your language right, so you can communicate effectively with those guys, and don't cut corners with the language. Obviously a lot of us are going to preach that, but really making sure from a coaching, from the way the players are responding and talking it back, that they're using the right verbiage so they understand. And then we talk, we're teaching in terms of technique first, and what that really, when I'm called to run that technique out of that alignment. And at that point, I don't necessarily need to, and the way we build all of our language isn't around full calls all the time. It's that part of the call that puts me into my particular technique. So if I can build first from a technique first standpoint and build the toolbox of skills that they need, then it becomes the when do I run it per call, and then becomes the why do I run it. And so when we really back it up, A1, it's about being really technically taught so I can execute it at a high level. Then that call comes in, when do I run it? And then why am I running it allows me to do it more efficiently and faster. And so we try and build that speed through that mindset. Did they have to know it all day one? No. We want to build the toolbox first. and then when, and then show them when you're going to use it in each call. And then the why obviously is the higher level player. And so that takes some time to get there. But to get us to actually start to operate on a level we need to, in those first installs, I think you got to think about how you're communicating that verbally to those guys and how they're communicating it back to show that understanding rather than these long drawn out explanations all the time. And if you can tighten that up, then you can speed some things up.
And looking back at it, at what point or how many practices in do you typically feel like there's an understanding of how things operate, there's a good foundation and understanding of, what this defense is, the why, that you start to see the performance really pick up and what these guys are able to do in practice, things, I guess, becoming a little bit more natural, a lot of the bumps in the road maybe ironed out?
Yeah, hey, I think we saw that bumping around all year. We play with an air raid offense in the spring, so not only do we have just the lineup and figure it out, but we also got the tempo up our tails all the time, and so that's a unique thing on its own. But I think each call is different, each situation's different. You feel like you got it handled in, as we build towards a live setting, you feel like you might have it handled in a 9-on-7 look, and then you got it handled in a 7-on-7 look, and then in a team period, and all of a sudden you're situational and you're not as great at it. And then all of a sudden you feel like you got to handle in the spring, and then we kick the game ball off in week 1, and it's different. And so, I don't think until all those bolts are flying, do you really have a clue that it's all together. I think you feel good about it as you build them into the scenarios closer to a live rep, but until you're actually doing it, you don't know how each one of those players is going to react in that first year. And so, feeling like you've put them in as close to that scenario as possible is really important. And to at least for you as a coach to feel comfortable about it, and I know a lot of times we're just trying to justify it to ourselves, but when you really know, obviously that's the end of that first one.
Yeah. Well, the challenge is the limited amount of reps that you have, in spring practice and fall practice leading up to game 1. That's always going to dictate everything. And, we've talked about how the fundamentals are important and making sure we develop those and understanding the scheme. But football as a whole, sometimes I think as coaches, we create this dichotomy that it's technique or it's scheme and one's more important than the other. But the truth of the matter is the game's always played in context. Not only that this technique is used within this scheme against this offense, but also that here's the situation that's going to apply and add a different dynamic to it too. So in looking at that, how long is it till you really start getting into the situational kinds of things that start to give everything more of that, again, that context that they need to really go out and execute this when it kicks off for real in week 1?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that you can get there a lot, to be honest. I think, there's so many scenarios in this game, and we all know there's so many situations you would like each player to just have a heightened awareness of, every snap that, I think there's some give and take, or what are the things that you feel like you're going to be in those first few weeks, and what are the things you can learn from in those, in that first part of that season, and do your best to get them in those situations. How often are we going to be backed up? Today's day and age, the ball is getting kicked out of the end zone most of the time, or fair caught. It's out on the 25. How much coming out from the 1 yard line are you going to work on? How much getting those guys to understand you're probably going to get hard counted down here, and those sort of scenarios, we don't spend as much time on nowadays because, with the exception of pinning down a punt, it's not happening as much. And so, you got to kind of prioritize. And so again, I think there's, in a first year leading into a first game, if you try and check all the boxes, that's a lot for a group of guys to handle with limited experience. And so, prioritizing what you think you're going to see and strategically looking at what are the scenarios that these guys are going to come across, starting there, and then hoping you deal with the ones that, weren't as practiced as much. And I think part of you has got to be ready to handle that. And so, and hopefully those scenarios don't cost you, and you can learn from them in a win or in a positive rep and go from there.
So you get through spring and you have all these individual pieces along the way you can look at, and then obviously the body of work. Here's where we started. Here's where we finished. Coming out of spring, what kinds of things are you looking for that then help you put together the depth chart for the fall, as well as the install for the fall? Here's not only what we've done, here's what we need to do based on some of these opponents that we're going to face. You guys being an air raid, distinctly different than what you're going to see, for example, from North Dakota State. So making sure that, again, the game is played in context with all the different things you're going to face.
Yeah, certainly, we didn't get to a lot of that stuff in the spring. And so, it came to, how much, like I said, that list of, things we wanted to hopefully get through. We wanted to use our summer to wrap our heads a lot like we did in the winter leading into the spring. We want the summer leading into the fall to be productive and aim towards, some of those things, the things that we didn't get to in spring and what we thought the season might look like outside of what we were defending in the spring. And so, how we wanted to go about it and how we'll always try and go about it is preparing for the non-conference first. And a lot of our non-conference, we saw Oklahoma, which gave us, really the air raid plus, a lot of the 12 personnel looks, and started to prepare for some of those formationally and personnel wise. Part of our summer was geared towards that. We played Northern Colorado, which was, an 11 personnel strictly spread team. Some of those units we got to actually turn the tape on and start to, hey, here's the way we defended them in the spring. Here's all the looks you've seen. And now here's the auxiliary stuff that, we've got to start to prepare for and we'll do, in fall camp leading into game weeks. And so, really starting to prepare those guys. It's easier to do once the language is built from that experience in the spring. They start to see it, how we'll go defending those formations. But, frankly, we you get into how different our league gets and what we play with on offense and defend. It is very different. North Dakota State is completely different than what we do philosophically, schematically, technically. And so, we didn't do a great job of building to handle that game in year one. We will in the future. There's no doubt about it. But it was a heck of a learning lesson in some of those situations.
So in looking then at year one as a whole, you're coming out of that, again, evaluating personnel, evaluating how these guys fit into the defensive scheme, what you have moving forward, as well as now having that experience of who are the people in your league, what are they going to throw at you? How does that affect spring number 2 and the way you're going to put things together? And I don't know, were you guys able to get any spring ball in at all, or is spring
Zero.
Ball gonna? Yeah.
Zero.
So now it's a little bit of virtual, but I guess from the standpoint of the prep for that and what you were looking at, movement into year 2.
Yeah. No, I think, we, like I said at the beginning, we peeled everything back. I mean, we did a heck of a self-scout. I mean, we really grinded through, what were the things that affected the outcome of games from a defensive standpoint. We want to start there. What was it? Was it schematics? Was it technical? Was it fundamental? Each explosive rep, things that we felt like were negatives in each game, really breaking down what was it, not just having this overall feel for what your season was, but really getting the data around it. What was it? Let's make a decision on every one of these reps, compile that together and say, hey, we need to get better schematically. We need to get better technically, fundamentally. And so we broke it down. We looked and we saw the flaw in kind of our team's experience from a fundamental standpoint. We were a poor tackling team at times in against the good teams with good backs that ran the ball the right way, and we were limited that way. It cost us a lot of explosive plays from time to time in those scenarios. And then we wanted to improve from a block destruction standpoint, getting off blocks on the perimeter against the high level teams. Playing Oklahoma, they blocked their tails off on the perimeter, and we wanted to, we didn't do a great job with a young group of in space doing that. And so, fundamentally, we look back and said, this is where we're starting and end. We've got to build our foundation on this. Regardless of what we put on the field schematically, our guys need to all have the ability to be productive, and not just from a skill set standpoint, but understanding it conceptually. how our concept of tackling, as a team tackling group, who is what in the tackle, allows us to have more confidence doing it. We want to build the confidence around it more than the actual skill set of finishing the tackle. I think everybody can do that. But the actual concept of who you are in it and building a ton of confidence was our goal. And then building on our culture of takeaways, being very intentional and holding it to the standard of when and how you go about that. We were going to start there, A1. We identified a lot of technical things that we needed to improve, like always. And then schematically, there's a lot of ways we needed to improve against, some of those, opponents that were really successful against us. And so, but A1 started with, our plan was to go back and give these guys the experience that they had never had in a spring, and building from there.
So I think one of the probably toughest things to evaluate sometimes is yourself and where you want to improve, where you want to get better. It takes that time to reflect. It takes a little bit of being honest with yourself. But from that standpoint, looking at, where Coach Johansen is going to get better for this team in the offseason, what kind of process do you have in place for yourself to kind of look at those things and then come up with a plan of attack?
Yeah, I think what I do is I go back through. I take a lot of notes after each ball game, and I have a booklet in each one. I guess it's on on my computer now, but you go back and say, what would you have done different, and what did you like about it? How well did we prepare? How well did we have our team prepared? What were the shortcomings of how we prepared? We feel like our guys understood it, a lot of those things. And you go back week through week and really look yourself in the mirror, and say, well, what did you need to do personally to get this group prepared to win the games against North Dakota State, to win the games we might have dropped that we shouldn't have. And, for me, one of the things I learned was, really understanding from a team perspective how much defense you need to carry into each week. And it's never been I've always, built defenses with very different styles of offense too. And looking back, I think a perspective sometimes we take as defensive guys is, hey, it's always a shutout. It's a 0 on the board. That's what every stop we're trying to make, a 0-yard gain. And that's not always, the most sound way to win a football game. And so for us, we're an air raid offense. We're gonna tempo the ball, and we're gonna move it up and down the field, and we're gonna cross the 40 and take a 4th down, and naturally that's gonna create more possessions, to defend. And I look back and say, I needed to carry more calls in some of these scenarios, just because,
right.
Hey, by that 15th, 16th possession, there's some good coaches across the ball too. And so, that was one of the things for me. I look back and say, hey, we need to, carry more, because that's part of our ID at South Dakota. We're going to be an air raid team that attacks teams offensively. And so as a defense, I think you look around the country and you see all the air raid groups, and the defenses are always, they're always shootouts. And that's right. Not what it's going to be here. And so, for us, it was about how do you fit in with, this style of offense. And I didn't, looking back, I, didn't do a great job at times of making sure we had enough on our plate in those weeks to sustain more opportunities to, see your pitch count. And,
right.
and so, I think that part was deal. And then just having experience going through a league for the first time, as much as you see it on tape, how these really good coaches in Missouri Valley are going to attack your stuff. And a lot of times that's different than what you've seen on tape. And how do you adjust? And there are times we did fantastic, and times we didn't. And so, we, looking at yourself, nobody, I don't grind anybody out more than myself. I've learned it through years, is if I'm not in control of it, then who else do I want in control of it? And so, a lot of shortcomings there that in a year one you get beat up with, a lot of stuff we're proud of too, but, moving forward, I think more than anything is having that, no different we ask our players, having a developmental mindset. Like how much better can you get at teaching one, and teaching what you're teaching, the fundamentals of it too.
So, Coach, you shared just a lot of great stuff today. I appreciate the detail and some of the honesty in asking you, especially that last question. But as you look at this whole idea of transitioning as a defensive coordinator, transitioning into a new program as a whole, what would you say is really the one thing that is going to help give you the winning edge to be able to be successful in helping a program move forward?
I think you gotta believe in your core beliefs. It's what do you think's important in this game and addressing it. If you think, if you honestly look in the mirror and say, hey, I think I can out scheme everybody and teach that scheme like crazy and go to work. If you're I believe in having my players fundamentally sound and make sure that's where you start and with your entire culture. That here's what we're going to build on. Here's where it's going to start. Here's the platform I feel like is important for us at the end of this. That's what we'll be known for. Be clear about that from the get-go and know that your players and your coaches and everybody around you is going to follow suit if you get them to understand why that's important. And a lot of times, I say scheme right away, but it's got nothing to do with scheme. When you first step in there, are you building great relationships? Are you challenging guys to be more receptive? And, because obviously you're in there for a reason, and guys are going to be, haven't had good experience to that point unless, you're in a different scenario. And so understanding that there's going to be skepticism and they want to see it proven in front of them before it actually goes, which is an impossibility. You've got to get those guys believing in what you believe in. And if you're trying to start somewhere that isn't the foundations of what you believe in this game, it's hard for them to believe in it. And so, I think starting there is an absolute must. And then really just believing in yourself. You know what I mean? I mean, you've gotten those opportunities for a reason. You got to go in and believe in what you believe in and put it all out there, and then know that you got the aptitude to adjust moving forward. And so, it's a challenging role. There's no question about it. But you guys are in it for a reason. And so, you're equipped to do it. And plus it's a fun ride too. I mean, These are challenges. You can have those jobs where you sit back and kick your feet up. And that's easy. Going and turning a program and being proud of something, I think is a really, really fun venture.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, for our listeners, what are the areas that you recruit?
I recruit Polk County, Iowa, which is just in Des Moines there, and in a southwest chunk of Iowa. I recruit the Omaha and Lincoln area, and I'm responsible for most of our recruits in Nebraska once they come through the other areas. So I got a small chunk there, and then all of our defensive recruiting. I go through all those players and travel around to see all those guys once that time comes. So that's my little Midwest honey hole. Bunch of great football there.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, how can our listeners connect with you?
Anytime on Twitter, Coach T. Johansen. You follow me, send me a message. I answer all those DMs of the guys that I follow for the most part. You can catch me. My email is travis.johansen@usd.edu. Although those get bombarded sometimes, more than willing to help anybody who possibly can. If there's anything we can ever do for you at South Dakota, our doors are always open. If you're in the Midwest and want to swing through, this is a place that is super inviting to everybody. So it doesn't matter what it is. We want to be part of helping everybody move their programs forward, with the exception of the guys in our league. So
always, right? Well, Coach, I appreciate you taking time again. Great conversation today, and best of luck to you guys in 2020 whenever we're able to get going again.
Yeah, appreciate you, Keith. Hopefully everything goes smooth here once we're through this. Hopefully everybody's staying safe and healthy, and we'll talk to you again soon.